So, does rising inflation make it even harder for the government to win the argument on a carbon tax? Our program guest this morning is the Climate Change Minister, Greg Combet. But before then, we'll see what the Sunday papers are saying around the country. And the Sunday Mail in Adelaide says that Mike Rann's 9-year term as Premier of South Australia might be coming to an end. Chris Kenny.
Yes, Barry. Mike Rann's been one of the more successful premiers in the country over the last decade. He's been a Federal Labor Party president and, as you say, longest-serving state premier. There's been a factional deal that's been in place for a number of weeks where the right of the Labor Party, which has the power in South Australia, is going to install Jay Weatherill from the left, the Education Minister, as Premier. But what's happened here is that there's a hurry-up. A young union leader, Peter Malinauskas, who is not in Parliament, has apparently told the Premier that he has to go now, and the deal has to be in quickly. So it's quite outrageous, really. And whatever you think about Mike Rann from a party political point of view, he's been a very popular Premier until about a year ago when he just scraped home at the election. And I would have thought most South Australians would think that he should be given at least the dignity of choosing and orchestrating the time of his own exit to some degree. Yeah. I don't think he can stay on.
Just on that timing, it's curious when you listen to when this was first put to him on Friday night. Here he is.
We heard this afternoon that you were contacted this afternoon about potentially retiring from politics before the next state convention. Is that correct?
I think that you need to check on your sources. I have absolutely no intention of retiring.
So you weren't contacted this afternoon to discuss?
I'm not being contacted by anybody who says that I will be retiring before the state convention.
You weren't contacted this afternoon to have discussions about your...
I can assure you that I have absolutely no intentions of resigning before the convention.
Now that before the convention keeps coming up. It's almost as if he wanted to do a Neville Rann and go out in that way.
Well, it's pretty perplexing that he's not allowed, after being such a long-serving Premier, to actually go on his own time. And when you think about it, I mean, it's just destructive to do this. So, I mean, if he made up his mind and that was his intention, why not let him go an extra 6 weeks?
And is this young union fellow somebody who's somebody who's influential and is in a position where he can dictate these sorts of things?
He carries the numbers. Don Farrell and the right in South Australia, the Senator Don Farrell and the Shoppies Union, they sort of carry the numbers. So, it would seem a bit impertinent for Mike Rann to be given that message by someone like that. But the other thing I'd say, Barry, though, is that it's interesting to happen this week because the second most important person in South Australia this week resigned. That is the coach of the Adelaide Crows, Neil Craig. Now, he was also under pressure, but he was allowed to do it, and he did do it in a very, very dignified manner. And I think Mike Rann should be given that opportunity too.
If there'd been a poll in the Sunday Mail, would it have said the 65% wanted him to go in the same way that it did with Mike Rann?
Yeah, I think so. I think poor Neil, people figured that a change was required, and that is the case with the South Australian Labor Party. But wow, to bring him down like this after 9 years in the job would be quite outrageous.
And don't you think the other point to make here is that they'd have learned from the federal sphere? I mean, how many more faceless men do we actually need inside the Labor Party?
But not just the federal sphere, it's also New South Wales.
New South Wales, South Australia now.
Its brand Labor is continually being tarnished by these sorts of actions.
Well, Don Farrell, of course, was one of the central figures in bringing down Kevin Rudd and installing Julia Gillard,
right.
as you say. So, I mean, that hasn't exactly turned out swimmingly for Labor.
Reinforces the stereotype.
They did get one extra government out of it.
Yes, well, I tend to agree with that. Some people don't, but I think you're right. I think by switching to Julia Gillard, they probably managed to scrape through that election. They may not have done so with Rudd. What do you think?
No, they didn't win.
Kerry Ann,
right.
The Age has somehow got hold of a letter from from David Cameron to Julia Gillard.
Wasn't walked up to Mr Schubert's office at all by the Prime Minister's office. It's a letter from David Cameron saying to Julia Gillard he was delighted to hear of the ambitious package of climate change policy measures. It was a bold step. And for Tony Abbott to deal with, it says your announcement sends a strong and clear signal that Australia is determined to make its contribution to addressing this challenge, which he says is one of the most pressing threats to long-term prosperity and security. So this is a fairly significant step for the British Prime Minister to take, and Tony Abbott will be facing questions about it.
But do you think it really matters? I mean,
well, I think it is because he's a Conservative Prime Minister, and this is a Labor. It's a very useful.
He makes the reference there to it adds momentum, and I think that's
that is the pertinent paragraph. It adds momentum.
But I've made a contrary argument.
And sends a clear signal.
That I think the key to the debate about the carbon tax is that essentially is about insiders versus outsiders politically.
Yeah,
it's about
true.
the Australian public being the outsiders in this debate and being dictated to by political insiders. And I think David Cameron is the ultimate political insider.
They're not going to listen to a UK Prime Minister. But the other point is, of course, the UK wants more people to trade in carbon, because countries like Australia have to cut the carbon. It's all the carbon traders in London who are going to make the money.
But if he did send this off his own bat, which Julia Gillard's office claims he did, then I think politically it is quite... it's a bit of a coup for Julia at a time when she's not getting a lot of... she's not winning a lot of brownie points on a whole range of areas, and so it's just, it's not of any big deal to the general public, but it's certainly a tick for her. It's a win.
That same story too mentions that Tony Abbott has asked the Auditor-General to look at the government's advertising on climate change. They say that it's deceptive and misleading. Ian McPhee's probably not the greatest fan of the government, given that what they've already done.
They watered down his
rules
powers in
regulations.
April, that's right, and which apparently he wasn't too happy about. Of course he wouldn't be. No Auditor-General or anybody that's in some position of authority in the bureaucracy wants their powers watered down by the political masters. And so Mr Abbott is saying that this is misleading. The $25 million campaign advertising campaign is misleading. It is a little unfortunate for Labor that they are using this advertising now before they've actually got the legislation before the Parliament. And Tony Abbott also says that saying 9 out of 10 households will not be affected is misleading too. It's actually only 6 million households or 6 million people. So, I mean, there's still big
drawing
figures.
attention to the 6 million, they'd probably take it. But
Yep.
Well, the information campaign is a misnomer, isn't it? Because it doesn't mention the carbon tax once.
Look, and I wonder whether these things are counterproductive anyway. I think voters are antagonised by seeing their money spent on this advertising.
Well, it's not just this government that's done that, of course. It's the previous government wallowed in political
I
advertising.
agree, and I think at times it was counterproductive for them.
That's right, they're the example.
didn't work
They
for
are
work
the
choices.
example. But of course, they both sides change the rules when they come in and then change them back. I mean, they scream blue murder, but then of course they do the same thing. I mean, they must think
And
the
we wonder
general
why
public are
voters are
fools.
cynical.
Exactly.
And
that's right.
Glenn, another accusation of sexual assault in the Navy.
Yes, well, this is an ugly story. It's in the Sunday Telegraph, Barry, and it says a young female sailor claims to have been sexually assaulted aboard HMAS Success. And this ship is notorious for its shocking history of sex, drugs and alcohol abuse. The 25-year-old has told police she was ambushed in a storeroom and assaulted. It's a nasty story, but I mean the ramifications I think go beyond the individual case here. I mean the question is what's wrong with the Defence Force culture? This comes off the back of the Skype sex scandal at the Australian Defence Force Academy. The Defence Department consistently says it's going to clean up this culture, and it just keeps resurfacing. And I think also they just don't learn. I mean, the fact of the matter is this happened last week. Did the Defence Department immediately issue a statement saying they had a problem? No, it wasn't until the Sunday Telegraph contacted them through the King's Cross Police that they finally admitted they had a problem.
Right. OK, well, that's the Sunday papers, and now we'll go to our program guest and the Climate Change Minister, Greg Combay, who joins us this morning from his electorate in Newcastle.